Mesopotamia, which makes up a large portion of what we know as the Middle East, was home to some of the earliest forms of writing. Some of those earliest texts included advanced scientific thinking on things like astronomy and mathematics. But even older texts contained very detailed recipes on making beer. In fact, a new tablet was recently translated, shocking both scientists and craft beer enthusiasts when it was discovered to read, "I am Evo Terra, and this is the Books and Beer Hangout." Welcome, everyone, to another Books and Beer Hangout. Our topic today, writing and publishing science-based books. We have two fantastic guests with us today, and I'll let them introduce themselves and tell us what beverage, if any, they are drinking. First, Miss Larissa Hammond.
Hello. It's so great to be here. I am a librarian with the Timberland Regional Library in Washington. I got my MLS in 2010, and I've been working in public libraries for over 4 years now. And that's pretty much it. I enjoy blogging, and I like science subjects, even though I am no scientist at all. So. Oh, and yes, the beer. I'm drinking a local beer called Fat Scotch Ale from a local brewery.
Oh, I haven't had that.
It's pretty good.
Well, Larissa, for what it's worth, I like libraries, but I'm not a librarian. So,
good. See, we're on even footing then. So.
Yeah.
While you have the camera, Dr. Philip Plait, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Phil Plait. I'm an astronomer and blogger. I write the Bad Astronomy blog for Discover Magazine, and I've written a couple of books. If you can't remember the title, just look over Evo's shoulder, and I think you'll see it right there, Death from the Skies. And my first book was Bad Astronomy, and it's great to be here with Larissa and Jeff, actually.
I'm the one that's showcasing your book, man. Terrible.
And I've possibly known Evo for quite some time.
A little bit.
And if I'd known drinking was mandatory, I would have poured some tequila in my fruit salad, but it's just, it's not fermented, sadly.
Oh, we could have had tequila? What?
Yeah, sure, we can do that.
I don't drink beer, notoriously.
Oh, okay.
We're trying.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
What are you drinking, Jeff?
Well, thank you for coming, everybody.
No,
Yes,
drinking.
That's the Books and Beer. So I am trying a Santa Fe Imperial Java Stout. They have a rather Spartan label here, so just before noon. And there you go.
Okay.
Not too bad.
I'm trying something new from Full Sail called the Brewer's Shale Phil Existential Alt. And I don't know what an existential alt is, but it looked neat. You know, and it tastes like beer. So good. It's kind of a brown ale type style. All right. So that concludes the beer portion of the programming. Let's jump into the books side of thing. I think it's So we invited these two guests on the show to talk about science-based publishing, obviously from the point of view of Phil, who's written a couple of science books and is keenly interested in the publishing of science-related material, not for himself only, but also for the industry as a whole. And Larissa, being a fan of science and being a librarian, we thought we might get her on to talk a little bit about public acceptance of science books and some of the trends that actually she is seeing out there. So let's start off with this concept of science books in general, not from a writing standpoint, but from a reading standpoint. So Phil, outside of writing, what kind of science books are you currently reading, or what styles are you enjoying most?
You know, one of the things about being an author is that once you publish a book, publishers want to send you books. And whether you want them or like them or need them or not, you get a lot of books. And what winds up happening is I wind up reading the books that are written by my friends. So the past year, I've probably only read 3 or 4 science books. I don't read as much as I'd like to, sadly. I've just started picking up science fiction again, which has made me very happy. So actually, I've been reading a lot more science fiction than I have science. But I read by Brian Cox, the UK physicist, and I should really know the title of it. He wrote Y E equals MC squared, and he has another book about why the universe exists, and you know what? I can't remember the title of it, and it's buried in my bookshelf. But this is emblematic of me. I can never remember the titles of books. But the thing is, when you're reading a science book, I found that if I'm 10 pages into it and the author hasn't hooked me right away, it's not going to happen. And it almost doesn't matter what the topic is. I've been reading books about planets orbiting other stars, the formation of the universe, why there's something rather than nothing. And you can write about these fantastic topics, and if I'm not sunk into this immediately, I'm not going to read it. And mostly it's the storytelling. Because I know the science, I want to know more about the science, but when the author engages me on a storytelling level, that's where I want to start reading these books, especially when it's on topics I already know about.
Larissa.
And I recommend Brian Cox's stuff.
Okay, well, take a look at that.
I really like the point about how it's about storytelling. A lot of nonfiction readers read because they want to learn something new. But really, what people really want is to hear a story and to be engaged. Otherwise, they would just read the encyclopedia to learn facts. And so a couple different books that I think that I've been interested in reading or that I've read recently are books that have other appeal factors, other really strongly developed appeal factors on top of the science. For example, there was the title of the book's escaping me now, but it's I remember, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but it's a great journalistic story about this woman who was from the South, this African-American woman from the South who had cells taken out of her without her consent, and they're still alive today even though she's been dead 60 years, and just how those have been implemented in different medical advancements or scientific discoveries. It's just fascinating because it's about a real person and connecting the science with the very human elements that are there is what makes them engaging. Another thing I'm really into right now are graphic novels. And so I actually checked this one out from the library. I haven't read it yet. It's called Feynman. And it's a biographical graphic novel about the famous physicist. And so it's pretty cool. I like that kind of stuff too. So I also made a book list because I'm a librarian and I do that stuff if anyone's interested in looking at some other book recommendations. So.
I'm pretty sure the only way to make comic books more geeky is to make one about physicists. That's going to do it.
Richard Feynman was a comic book anyway, his whole life.
Pretty much. Yeah, exactly.
Being upside down and all that stuff. All those stories you hear about him are true.
So, Larissa, I have a question. I've always wanted to know about librarians. Do you cut in front of the reservation line? I mean, can you get your name in there and grab these books and make other people wait?
Well, technically I could, but I don't because we're not supposed to do that at work.
Okay, understand.
Jeff, that's the question you've always wanted to ask a librarian. Okay.
Yes, well, anyway, but on the storytelling.
Power.
So it was interesting, Phil, you brought this up, and you touched on it as well, and I think science-based books evokes ideas of textbooks easily. And, when bringing a good story around a scientific topic, whether it's like the line of genes or line of cells, or, a concept, helps a lot in the storytelling, but how much fiction do you think can be brought, how much license can be taken to weave that story? Or either whether personally, or do you think it's something that you'd like to see people bring more fiction to it to engage more readers?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say both, actually. If you're telling a scientific story, like in Death from the Skies, I was talking about events that can actually happen, or at least you can imagine them happening. There's never going to be a black hole that's going to pass through the solar system, but we understand the physics of what would happen if such an event were to happen. So I wanted to make sure that what I talked about, it's catastrophic and it's apocalyptic and it makes Bruckheimer movies look like, I don't know, something Hemingway would write. But in the meantime, I want it to be accurate. So I can say you know, the black hole comes in, it tosses planets out of its way, it tears the Earth apart, all this stuff would really happen. So I can make a great story out of it without too much effort, which is good because I'm really lazy. It's still telling a story. On the other hand, the accuracy of it, is easy enough to maintain, and I try to be as accurate as possible. On the other hand, if you're telling a story that's a science-based story, but it's not a science book, like, you know, the graphic novel of Feynman. Why not, you know, make it a little sillier if you want to? I wouldn't make him something he wasn't. You know, I don't know, Scandinavian. I don't know, something, whatever. You make something weird up. It should be accurate. But it's okay to play with that a little bit if the format allows it, like in a movie or something like that. But if you're saying, I'm writing a science book, or I'm writing a book about a science story, it should be as accurate as possible.
Willing to give a lot of artistic license there, or does it need to stick pretty close to being just about the science?
I guess it just, I missed the first part of your question. You mean for a science book?
Yeah, I was actually going to try to get the same question from Larissa, but
okay,
I froze there for a second. No.
Blanked out. Okay, I think same
Sorry,
for her. Okay,
could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, for a science book,
Okay.
how much license can you give to someone telling a story or putting a fictional account through it?
I think it depends. If you're writing a fictional story with a science-based background, I think you can take as much license as you want, except for the actual science that you're using as your background. I actually just thought of another graphic novel called Laika, and it's about the dog that was put on Sputnik 2. A lot of artistic license was taken with that book because it gave the dog a whole backstory, but no one really knew where the dog came from. But then when it came to the actual events of Sputnik 2 and the science behind what they did, or the technical things that they had to do to get the dog into space, I mean, that was pretty accurate. And I also think there's a fine line, too, because you want to write something that's engaging and accessible to a lot of people, but also you want to maintain that academic honesty, and I think that it's difficult for a lot of experts to do that because it's taken you years and years of research and work to get to where you are, and then trying to take a layperson's perspective and then not dumbing it down but removing the jargon and the expertise and then still telling something that is somewhat accurate is kind of a hard thing to do.
So dovetailing off of that for a moment, Phil, you mentioned earlier that you're getting the books that a lot of your friends are writing, and you're fortunately getting back into science fiction. But going back to science for a moment, being a scientist, should more scientists be attempting to write these books for the general public, or is there something inherently wrong with that notion? Are they just not very good public communicators?
Both. In fact, I go to meetings with other science communicators, and we talk about this sort of thing. You know, what do? We need more and better science communicators. And for a while there was this push that everybody who goes to grad school in science, biology, physics, astronomy, whatever, they should be trained for outreach. And I think maybe not. You know, maybe we can do that, but don't let just anybody do it, because not everybody's that great at it. Find the ones who are best at it, and target them and say, you need to come with us, and then train them in how to do this. There are groups that do that, and I think the same is true for writing. Science writing, when you're writing a science book versus a blog versus for journalism, to actually be reporting on the science stories versus writing in a scientific journal like the Astrophysical Journal or something like that, the professional society journals. These are all very different styles. And some people can do it and some people can't. I actually struggled really hard with writing the scientific journal papers. It's a lot of work. It's hard to take away the stuff you don't need. Whereas when I'm on the blog, it's all about the stuff you don't need. It's you know, here's the story, here's the basic stuff. I don't want to go off on too many tangents because I don't want to lose the main thrust, especially when when people are going to read 140 characters and stop. But a lot of it is about, hey, this is how this relates to this, and it's kind of a funny story how I was with a friend and then this happened and it relates to this star exploding or whatever. That's a different style, and I think a lot of people might be able to focus on one and not the other. So finding these people and making sure that they can do it and get the chance to do it, I think, is more important than getting everybody doing it.
Larissa, is part of your job as a librarian to help figure out which type of text the person asking for it is more likely to read? Because obviously there are scientists out there that are publishing books that sure read like scientific journals, and then there are scientists that are writing books more like Phil is, this one, that is reading like just a really good story as well. Do you try and figure out what kind of reader the person is and make that decision?
Yes, in my field that's called reader's advisory. And so what we do is, as librarians, we strive to break apart the elements that make up stories in general and then see what people gravitate to. For example, two people could read the same book and like it for completely different reasons.
Like Twilight.
Or 50 Shades of Grey.
Wow, what an example to pull out of thin air.
Make your physics book more appealing by throwing in some of that. So anyways, no, please don't. Yeah, so finding a good question to ask, and this is something at a recent reader's advisory workshop that I went to ask a reader is, what do you like about a book? And then when they explain what it is they liked about a book they read, they give some clues as to what other kinds of things that they might be interested in reading. So yeah, that is part of my job. I don't have a lot of scientists coming into the library and asking for reads. It's really only lay persons. It's a rural community library, and so a thing I think that as a librarian I could do to connect people with science is generally most people, when they think of reading, they think of fiction, and then just finding science books that have elements of the different kinds of genres that they're already interested in reading anyways. Like maybe they're into crime stories or detective stories, and then you can pair that up with this science-based book about forensics and crime stories, and then they might be interested in something like that. So yes, my job is very much evaluating those kinds of things and reader interests and likes and dislikes. So.
Great. So I'll jump in. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. Go ahead.
No, you Phil.
Go.
Well, okay. Then Larissa, how many books are you familiar with then? I mean, if somebody came in and said, "I need something written by a left-handed author about forensics, where the biology, blah blah blah."
Well, here's
Paul Samuelson's book, right? Sure.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. My job as a librarian actually prevents me from reading in depth into a lot of different books. I tend to read a lot about a lot of different books, like reviews and that kind of thing, and then making connections with what kinds of books they are just based on reviews. So no, I don't. Off the top of my head, I couldn't just give the best recommendation to someone. I'll use either a database. We have novelists that breaks down appeal factors in books, and that's something I've been utilizing recently. So I do have tools at my command, and there's also other book blogs that I follow, and plenty of other ways to find out what's out there, as far as with internet searches, and as well as like databases like novelists that I use. So
then, Larissa, a question: where are you seeing perhaps a gap in content that's out there to recommend in science, where someone says, I want to learn something about a topic, but there isn't quite something you can recommend? There are opportunities out there.
I guess I'm not fully understanding the question. Could you clarify that a little bit more?
Sure. Are you seeing perhaps just people coming in? I'm really curious about, I was going to say astronomy, but that's a bad example to use with the person down at the end over there. Any particular?
There's a billion astronomy books out there. So.
Sure. So maybe geology or botany.
Yes. but there isn't a good, say, introductory book, or they know a little bit, but it's sort of there's introductory and then there's PhD level, but nothing in the middle, or it's all too dry. And is there some gap in terms of either?
I honestly think there's a book for everything out there. I mean, I have never, I've been on different sort of reference interviews where it's taken a long time to find something, but I've never and I've even had, people give me their phone numbers and have me call them back later with some book suggestions. But I have never just said, oh, sorry, you have no option. That book does not exist in this universe. I don't think I've ever hit that wall. I've definitely had times where it's taken me a long time to find something that's very specific, but
I'm making a note. I'm definitely going to come to you with all book questions I have in the future, because your infinite bookshelf is amazing. So,
and as a writer, that makes me sad. It's like, well, then what am I going to write about?
The infinite monkeys have taken care of it. So we're
for sure. I'm thinking more like topical things, or if they're looking for information, maybe there isn't like that book that will like be the best book ever for them, but it'll at least suffice for what they're looking for. If that makes sense. So no, I don't want to discourage people from writing. I don't think that the best books have been written at all. So
okay.
I've at least been able to help people find something, even if it's not like the best thing ever in that subject. So.
All right. So Phil, question for you: what is the role then of, say, hobbyists and say amateurs in a given field in terms of contributing to science-based books? Is there one, or is it something that should be really left to the people who really are experts in the field to craft around?
Don't try this at home. I'm trying to think of how to phrase that, how to phrase my answer. There are a lot of amateur astronomers who contribute to science, and the term amateur itself is losing its meaning. And I put it in quotes now when I talk about amateur astronomers, because these men and women know more about their telescopes observing the sky than a lot of professional astronomers I know. And I'm thinking there's a metaphor or an analogy or a simile or some sort of, I need a librarian here to look up word usage, man. But there's something like that as far as astronomers writing as well. Nobody's a professional writer until they publish their first thing, right? Until, if you want to talk about being a professional once you're paid or once something is officially published or whatever, I don't care how you want to define that. But I wasn't a professional writer when I wrote my first book, or even my first magazine article or whatever. And I have to remind myself that I'm a professional now, which is hard to remember because I don't wear pants very often. I'm wearing pajama bottoms as I'm sitting here. I'm thinking. Sorry, Jeff. Was that a bad image for you? They clash with my shirt.
I've been wondering this whole time.
Okay.
Now the magic's gone.
It really clashes with my shirt, or else I'd show you. But I think that's fine, as long as somebody knows the subject and loves the subject. If you don't like the subject, you probably shouldn't be writing about it.
So speaking about subjects, I want to cut in here because we're at the end of the show here. So I'll start with Larissa, and then I'll go to Phil, and just give me some quick answers on this one. I want you to give me an idea of something in science that's really cool and interesting, and we haven't yet written very fantastic books for the laity. Is there some field of science out there, Larissa, that should be uncovered that we just haven't done yet?
Well, I think honestly, physics and astronomy is, no offense, Dr. Plait, a really well-written or a prolific field of books that you can come across now. I think that maybe botany, we haven't delved very deeply into botany yet. I haven't found many of those. But I did want to say something regarding the role of lay persons and writing about science. Earlier we talked about how not a lot of science are equipped for outreach. And so there are a lot of passionate people who realize the importance of scientific endeavors who can be those advocates. And a lot of those people as well scientists are generally not in charge of their own funding. And so always making the case about what you're doing and how important it is, it's very important for the general public to understand at least the importance and at least the magnitude of what you're doing. So that's just what I wanted to say.
So Phil, that's a great response. Phil, so same question to you. What's the missing field?
Well, I think she's right, and certainly in physics and astronomy, the field's kind of saturated right now. I was trying to think of a new field. I mean, I only read about astronomy and physics, really. I don't read about botany and geology that much, although I love those fields and they're interesting. I think probably where this would be going would be the fields that are cutting edge right now. But even those, the study of planets orbiting other stars, the search for life on other planets, these are also, there are books being written about that. They're not necessarily good books. I'm not saying they're bad books. Maybe we're still looking for that, that cosmos that broke his brain, anything that Sagan's written, something like that for those fields. But I think when you look at the cutting edge of science, that's probably where there's always going to be the next frontier that somebody could be writing about.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Well, what I would like to do from you, we are out of time, but what I want to do for those listening out there, watching out there, if you check back to our website, we will actually get a couple of recommendations here offline from our two guests on books you should be reading right now that are really fantastic, and we'll post those on the website. But Larissa, Phil, thank you very much for joining us here on the Books and Beer Hangout. We enjoyed it immensely. And for those out there listening, remember we do this every Thursday night at 6 o'clock. Well, 6 o'clock, Jeff a nice time. Figure out what that means to you. But we post it on Google Plus, and we do it on Hangout On Air, so you can watch it live on YouTube or on Google Plus, or you can check out our website at epublishunum.com, and you can always download the latest episode right there. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks.
I will get there, I promise.